Very good evening, friends, and thank you so much for joining in. My name is Ganesh from HDFC Securities, and we welcome each one of you to this edition of a Guru Gyan series, where we have experts from the industry come and speak to us about their perspectives on the market and investing. Markets continue to be volatile. There is curiosity and anxiety in the minds of the investor. In this scenario, quality and long term investing become extremely important. And with this thought in mind, I would now like to invite Mr. Chandresh Nigam, our star speaker for today, MD and CEO of Axis AMC, an industry veteran from IIT Delhi and armed with a business degree from IIM Calcutta, has been with Axis for the last 11 years. With that, it's over to you, Mr. Chandresh.
Thank you, Ganesh, and welcome all of you. Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here. Thanks to HDFC Securities for arranging this. The reason I'm always very excited on speaking to everyone is because of the topic. The topic is something which has been very close to my heart for many years. And we will go through some of the thoughts I have had, and I have been in markets now nearly 30 years. So some of that has whatever I have learned is, and then we have seen and used that and tested that in real markets. So I'm going to share some of that. What we'll try to do is to basically destroy some of the myths which are generally associated with equity investing. We'll start very basically on why we need to do equity, which I'm sure many of you are already aware of, and then go on to beat, or as I said, destroy some myths. And then lastly, a few words on the current scenario and how do we navigate ourselves in this kind of uncertain scenario. And then we can have some questions. So let me start off. So today, the title of the slide says investing in an uncertain world. Obviously, whatever we are seeing in terms of the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, this is something which has certainly caught us completely unaware, and in that sense, there is huge uncertainty. The reality is that while, yes, this is something really big, unexpected, a black swan event as it is called, investing has never been something which is easy in that sense. There always, any point in time, there will be lots of events related risk, and there will be significant uncertainty. I mean, if you just take the last 20 years, I think 1 out of 3 years we've seen a very large dislocation, whether it was the Kargil war, the nuclear bomb blast which the Indian government did way back in 98, and then there was the technology bust, and then the global financial crisis, and in India we've had a number of things, and we had demonetization, etc. And there are times when obviously these events hit you, and then you figure, hey, what's going to happen? But still, after all this which has happened, we are still seeing investing in equities bringing reasonably good returns. In fact, I would say, depending on your strategy, really very good returns as compared to alternatives. So if we can just move to the next slide, please. So, the first question, which obviously always comes, is if equity investing is fraught with so much uncertainty, then why really go there? And I think the answer is very simple. We've seen that if you want to just grow wealth, forget about growing wealth, just retain the purchasing power of your money, you have to be in equity. So inflation is something which is eating away the purchasing power of our money, and to beat that, you need to have a reasonable rate of return, and especially post-tax. I think once you take away taxes, there's very little left in other forms of investing, which is there on the next slide. Next slide, please. And as we can see, the last now 30-40 years, inflation has been at around 7%. So post-tax returns have to be above 7% for us to really just maintain the purchasing power of our money. Bank FD numbers are not adjusted for taxes, but they've just marginally beaten inflation. And similarly, gold, now obviously the last year has been good, so numbers are looking good. Otherwise, normally it's been just a little over inflation. But then the real standout asset class has been equity. So that's been at the 15%, which is handsome 7-8% outperformance versus inflation. So we can say that it has really created wealth. It's been a long-term wealth creator. But when we suddenly start to then look at this slide and say, hey, equity is the place to be. And then what I'm going to take you through in the next slide is, yes, equity is the place to be, but it's a very, very select area or space within the equity markets, which is where the returns are coming from. And that is the real meat of this, or the intent of this presentation. That where is it and why is it and what is it that is contributing to this great long-term performance in equity. It is not that everywhere you go that, oh, hey, I have decided to put money in equity, so wherever I go, I will make good returns. Actually, that is not the case. And that is the myth which we are going to bust today. Next, please. Next, please. So let's start with uncertainty. I think the one reason why many people are shunning away from equity despite the long-term great performance is that there is so much uncertainty. And the real thing is that while we all know uncertainty is there and all of us keep on coming out and saying the concerns in the market, and we hear businesses shutting down, etc., etc., and globally there is tension, geopolitical tension, and then obviously the COVID is something which came and hit out. So if we are always, and this I'm talking about very sophisticated institutional investors, if they are also trying to call out that, hey, what is the concern in the market? And then there are some of the things on this slide. But what I'm trying to tell you through this slide is that while many a times sophisticated investors have expressed concerns, even they have been surprised by ultimately what came out or what followed in that particular year. So one is we are always concerned, and two, we always get hit by again something which was not even expected or anticipated even by the most sophisticated investors. Now this is important for us to understand, because if we say it's all uncertain, but to internalize that and then to take that into account in our investing practices is extremely, extremely important. We have to be always ready. In our parlance, this is what we call as risk management. Risk is something which just goes wrong. I mean, if you know what's going to go wrong, then it's no longer a risk. Risk is something which just comes, hits you, and your portfolios and your investing style has to take care of it. You have to be alive to it all the time. Next. Now let's get into a little bit into deep dive into equity markets. Where is the money being made? Now, this slide essentially is a survey of the global equity markets. There are about 25,000 stocks which are traded globally. And we'll come to the India numbers. And of that, 1,000 companies create wealth. Create wealth means that they earn a reasonable return over risk-free rate in that particular economy. So it's like only 1,000, which is just 4% of businesses have created all the wealth which has been created by equity markets in the whole world. Yeah. So 96% of the companies actually could not beat the risk-free rate. Let's come to India. In India, in the Bombay Stock Exchange, there have been about 9,000 companies which have been listed to date. The Bombay Stock Exchange has now nearly got a 150-year history. Now, of these 9,000 companies, the number of companies which are traded today is about 2,000. So 7,000 companies are dead and gone. And even out of these 2,000 companies, our analysis says that only about 250 to 300 companies have created wealth, which means about long-term return of more than 12%. So what is this? The real reason, so these numbers are essentially in line with the global percentages. So all the wealth in India is again being created by these 250 odd businesses, and large parts actually even within this 250 is fairly concentrated in few numbers. So the nature of equities and equity business is risk. And over a period of time, if businesses are not able to handle the risk, they just completely collapse, go away. And I'm sure you will all agree with me that when these companies came to the market with their IPO and got listed, they obviously were doing well. But and many of these companies got listed as recently as the late 90s and some parts in the first decade of this century, maybe 2000 to 2010. And within this short period of 10, 20 years, many of them are kind of dead and gone. So when we say that equities create wealth, I think you should keep that in mind, that only few equities, few companies really create wealth. Next. The other myth about equity markets is that economies grow and hence markets grow. Now, the classic case is the case of China. China has been a very strong performer from a GDP growth, economic growth perspective. Between the last 20 years, its nominal GDP has been growing at about 12-13%. But the market growth is only 5%. It is tremendous wealth destruction. Normally, you will expect that if GDP is growing at 13-13%, corporate sector, which is generally the more organized part of the economy, non-agriculture related, which is agriculture anyway grows slower than overall GDP, maybe a 14-15% top line growth for the corporate sector should happen. And that over long periods of time, and hence profit growth should be something similar, and that should get reflected in stock prices. But hey, that does not happen, because a large number of companies, while they will grow their top line, they are not able to grow the bottom line at the same levels. So in a sense, the situation in China is saying that equity market profit growth is probably not there or very, very small. And why is this happening? Because companies do not have what we call as pricing power, and that ultimately goes into saying what is the sustainable competitive advantage, why should the quality of the business is essentially not that great. So again, GDP growth is not really linked to market. So somebody comes and tells you that yes, it's a good tailwind to have if the economy is growing, but that does not necessarily lead to stock market and stock price performance. Next, please. And that's where I think this is the Indian situation. I think this is the most important slide I have in this whole presentation. I know it will be a little difficult to decipher, so let me just read out some of the numbers. Last 10 years, we've seen the Bombay BSE 100 index. Now, these are the top 100 companies in our country. Now, if you had invested 1 rupee in this index, it would have become nearly 4 rupees. So it is like quadrupled in 10 years' time, about a 14% compounded growth. So that's all good. You will say, okay, yes, equity markets have done great. Now, when we get a little deeper, when you dig a little deeper, what we will see, in our parlance, we use the term quartile, but let's look at this and divide these 100 companies into buckets of 25, 25, 25, and 25. So our top 25 companies in terms of performance, if you were able to build a portfolio of just these companies, that 1 rupee would have actually been 13 rupees. So a return of 27%. And mind you, these are the top 100 companies. And if you are so unlucky that you built a portfolio of companies between number 76 and 100, which is the bottom 25 of these so-called large, great Indian businesses, your 1 rupee actually would have been down to 30 paisa, minus 15% compounding. So what I am trying to tell you is there is such a massive, massive dispersion. Yeah. There is a 40x, and this is a portfolio. This is not a comparison of one stock with another stock. It's a large 25 stock portfolio. One portfolio is doing 40 times better than the other, or you can say the other one is doing so poorly. And again, mind you, these are the top 100 companies. So, in fact, if you were to just take away, and instead of having a 100 stock index, have a 75 stock index, and take away the top quartile, the index return actually falls to 0. And that is my basic thesis, that actually businesses, most businesses over the long run either lose money or they're just about stay where they are or create very small amount of return, not covering cost of capital. The great amount of wealth ultimately which is created by a few companies, which because they keep on growing over a long period of time, they have a significant impact on the markets, and then the markets are able to give out a reasonable return number, which is about that 15%, the left of the chart, and we say, hey, equity markets have given return. But no, actually it is only the great businesses, the strong businesses, companies which sustain high growth with profitability over a long period of time, which is where this return comes in. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things which I have, when I was a student, I learned was, or I was told was that, to get high returns, you must take high amounts of risk, which is true. We are saying we want to get into equity markets, fixed income, or other forms of low risk or safe instruments do not create wealth. So I have to take higher risk and go into equity, which is true. So if I want high returns, I have to take some amount of risk, move from safety into equities, which is a riskier asset class. But when it comes into within the equity segment, now sometimes when we come to equity, we suddenly start thinking, "Arey, let's try and find the next great stock, the next great idea. What will become, suddenly give me 40%, 50%, 100% return in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months." Yeah. So our general thinking is, okay, let's go and buy something which is, will become become a rocket or something. And hence we are knowingly or unknowingly getting into the what we call as high beta or high risk portfolio. Now here's where things get interesting. In equity markets, actually, high risk equal to high returns does not work. Actually, it is the low risk, which gives the higher return. So we put out some data here. The lowest risk, in our parlance, we use the word beta. The lowest risk portfolios perform the best, as you can see the left side, and the highest risk portfolios with the highest beta are in fact actually negative, over the last 10-year kind of period. So that's the other myth we want to kind of bust, that high risk is actually not equal to high returns, or rather the myth is high risk is equal to high returns. Doesn't work in the equity markets. Next, please. The other thing about equity markets, this thinking is that, hey, things are expensive. No, something is very high PE, so it will not create wealth or it will not give me return. Or something is cheap on a PE basis, or in financial sector we call about price to book multiple. I hope all of you are aware about price to earnings multiple. Basically, what is the price and what are this year's profits? And we get a ratio. And depending on the sector, company, today in markets, you can find PE ratios from 10 to as high as 100 and little higher. Now, the myth essentially is that if you buy low price things, low price in terms of PE, not in absolute levels. So 10 rupee stock versus 100 rupee stocks, that's not what I'm talking of. I'm talking about PE. So a company with 8 PE or 10 PE is better than a company with 30 PE. Now, this is, I think, one thought which has actually brought many investors in equity markets to grief, because what is typically happening is something which is looking like cheap probably deserves to be so. No? So that's what we call as value traps, that you buy something which looks like it's cheap, but then over a period of time, the value of the business, it's actually cheap for a real reason. Yeah. So there will be very, very few cases where you suddenly see that the business completely transforms and you make a lot of money. There are some cases, but most cases actually the value of the business actually keeps coming down and the stock keeps heading generally lower. And there are some examples there. I won't go too much into detail, but there are a number of examples in the market. We've put out 2 from the banking sector and auto sector, where from a starting PE multiple, which is much higher for a quality stock or high quality business, versus what eventually came to be known as a value trap. No, So it looked like very cheap. So in autos, 30p versus a 12p, but 4-year stock performance has been virtually nearly doubling in the high quality stock, and you actually lost nearly all your money in the value trap, and similarly in the banking sector. Now this ties very beautifully with what I said earlier, that there are very few companies which ultimately really provide a lot of wealth or help investors create wealth. And this is again saying that don't go for poor quality businesses. They are very alluring. Just because that their stock is available cheap, P is very low as compared to high quality business. I think that's brought a lot of grief to investors. So just be very careful whenever, if you are investing directly or looking at portfolios where somebody comes and tells you, hey, my PE is low, I've bought cheap stocks and I think I will make money. I think it always have to be correlated with the quality of the business. Yes. Next, please. So one more thing about equity markets, and I think we should all be very careful about this, is equity markets, as we have been saying right through this presentation, are uncertain. And there is a chance that there could be a big drawdown, and it can happen anytime because these events are inherently not forecastable, as we have seen in COVID-19. And we've actually seen that the markets fell nearly 40%, but as we know that the good companies kind of bounced back. So our idea in building a portfolio should be that we should never have very large drawdowns, because if you have large drawdowns, then the recovery to get back to your original principle becomes very, very difficult. So if you have a 15-20% drawdown, okay, if the market moves up back up by about 25%, you would have recovered your loss. If you move down 50%, you have stocks in your portfolio which really collapse. And this typically happens for very unsustainable businesses which do not have companies which do not have a long-term sustainability or strength. If you draw in by 50%, now you need to generate 100% return to just get back to your level of earlier investing. So it's important at all times to control the downside. Now I know we cannot put it to zero because this is a risky asset class. But it is important for every investor to ensure that you have minimal drawdown or as low a drawdown as possible. And again, it points to the same thing, that you be with really large, very good quality companies where the drawdown is relatively less. And as we are seeing in COVID, the recovery, when it comes the first in these businesses, because that is what investors are looking for in an uncertain kind of an environment. They will all just head towards quality. So to control all these risks, whether it is the uncertainty in the market, whether it is the fact that high beta performs poorly, the fact that GDP growth cannot be translated into equity returns, only great quality businesses. I think investing in a portfolio of really high quality businesses is the answer to really invest, taking into account or controlling all the many risks which are out there in the market. And as I said, these businesses have created all the wealth. So it's a kind of a one-stop answer for all the worries or we have about the markets. Short run, anyway, as I said, uncertain, we will see some downsides. But if we are able to build portfolios of great 25, 30 great growth businesses, I think 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, we will create lots and lots of wealth. Next, please. So that's what we try to do. Probably we are the only fund house which has a strategy of just focusing on very high growth companies with a very strong business model. What is also becoming very relevant is sustainability. I will not go into detail here, but basically how the companies impact the environment, how are they well governed or not, how do they take care of minority shareholders. all that is something which helps the business to be a lot more sustainable for the long run. And when you have a strong business model, you get pricing power, and then that leads to high ROEs. So in one word, if we were to say high quality means high ROEs and good free cash flow. And if you, even at the low growth rate, I mean, we have seen India as an economy has moved from the 9-10% growth rate in 2010, now more to like 4-5% before the crisis. These businesses will keep on because of the opportunities available in the Indian market, young population, all that, will keep growing 2-3 times of their GDP multiple. And hence, great opportunity for all of us as investors. I think we are truly blessed in this country that we have a large number of very high quality businesses. As I said, it's not large from that if you compare it with the 9,000 listed companies, but about 200 odd companies are really good wealth creators, and we anyway have to build portfolios of anywhere between 25 to 40 companies. So it's a great opportunity, and this is in sharp contrast to China, where we saw that Chinese businesses where they were growing top line by maybe 13-15% or more, but stock market did not give the returns. In India, again, we have grown at the same rate. The only thing is our inflation number is higher, so 7% GDP, 6% inflation, maybe nominal growth is 13%. But what we saw that our markets are giving returns of about 15-16%. So, and that's all thanks to these a few high quality, great growth businesses. So my mantra for wealth creation, for taking stock of or having a good solid answer to the problem of risk and uncertainty lies in this one strategy: high quality, high growth businesses which will sustain profit growth and cash flow in the foreseeable future. Next, please. Now, there's one thing apart from strategy which I think all of you need to keep in mind, and that is this whole thing about sentiment and emotions. Now, if the data is so compelling, that hey, it doesn't actually, it's not really rocket science. I mean, all the data which I have showed you, I mean, it's just it's available for everyone to see. And all we need to do is to keep emotions at bay and invest for the long term in good quality businesses. And hey, we will have the desired outcomes or the result which we want. Now, there is this whole problem about sentiment in the short run. And let me just take you through this. It's really the real wealth destroyer or potential for wealth destroyer from my perspective. So if we look at let's say the US market, so and I'm saying we put in here a global investor because US is the largest market globally. Now, a fund which actually just, let us say, gave market returns, which means it, let us say, just tracked the S&P 500 index in the US over the last 15-20 years would have given about 10% return. And this is the fund return which anybody could have participated in. But when we look at and do an analysis of what actually came into the hands of the investor, that was only 5%. So 5% was lost. Where did it go? The fund has generated its return. Investors have invested in the fund. They ought to have made that return. But the reality is they did not. And that's where the timing comes in. So people have put more money when the markets are already high, or probably got out when the markets were low, wrong timing. So it's all about timing. People generally buy and sell driven by the emotion. Either you want to make a gain, quick gain, which is positive emotion, which is generally what we call as greed, and you just trade and buy, or you generally are in a fearful mode. You want to avoid further loss, or you want to avoid a loss. So that's the general emotion there is of fear. And that greed, fear, emotion basically does not allow you to stay in a fund for a long period of time. We anyway know it's difficult to time, and I have one slide on that. But if there was an investor who just got in and stayed with the fund, an average investor, his outcome would be much better as compared to what an average investor actually got by timing in and getting out. So that's the situation for a global investor. Now, before I come to the Indian situation, I should say actually so people would have thought that this is something which is true for equity markets. But if one were to do an analysis for debt markets, where the volatility risk is not that high, even there we see, so while there is nearly a 5% gap in performance, even in fixed income funds or debt funds, the difference is about just a little less than 4%. That's very, very large. Come to the, so basically sentiment plays everywhere. So you just have to be very, very watchful that what are you doing? Are you doing it from a rational perspective, or are we overreacting to the current mood and sentiment in the market? So coming to the Indian situation, story is no different. There is actually 6.5% differential between what an average, in fact, that's not an average, it's a total mutual fund industry. The funds have delivered over the last many, many years. And the investors, that's about 19%. And the investors have got only 12.5%. The only way to bridge this gap is to invest regularly and then stay with the fund for a long period of time. The fund managers have done a great job. I know some of you can argue that maybe the last year or so has not been that good, but yes, these times come. But the long-term, medium, long-term funds have really provided very handsome returns. And the last thing we on the asset management side would want is that, hey, while the funds are doing well, the investors are not really able to take advantage of the numbers and the returns which the fund industry is putting in. And the only way to do that is to just stay there long term. Next slide, please. So that's some more data on what is the strategy. SIP remains to be the best strategy. While sometimes it does look like, this thought is very alluring. A market, it will be down 20%, I can invest, or it will be up 20% and I can sell off, etc., etc. I think long-term data just says, and this is a chart which says, if you got the worst day of the year to invest, so you tried to time and you got the best day. So if you tried to time and you were right all the time, invested on the best day of the month, which was the market low during the month, your return over the long run would have been 14%. And if you had got the worst timing, which is the highest day or highest level of the index in the month, your return would have been about 13%, not much different. And if you just chose a normal day, let's say the 1st of the month or the 10th of the month, your return is somewhere in between, 13.5%. So there is no great value in trying to time and say that, let me see if I can get things cheaper. Because long run, great businesses, they just keep powering ahead. Doesn't matter where you really start. The important thing is you should just start. So I will stop here. I think if I have to just summarize whatever I said, there are two parts to the equation. One is choosing the right strategy, and in that sense, the right asset manager, fund manager. High quality growth is where all the wealth in this world has been created. So you ensure that the portfolios you own, the mutual fund you own, or whatever portfolio you own has a fair number, in fact, bulk of the money allocated to such businesses from a long-term perspective. And on the second side, on the other side, is this whole behavior, which I will urge each one of you to exhibit and display, that you will not get swayed by the short-term sentiment which is prevailing, and stay in the long run. If the first strategy works, irrespective of market conditions, irrespective of what happens in the short run, eventually you will make a lot of money. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The numbers are there to show, as compared to post-tax return of an FD today, which might be about 4 or 5%. I think which doesn't even cover inflation. If we can still generate 12 to 15% long-term returns, which I'm quite confident over the medium to long term the industry can provide, it is a meaningful 7, 8, 10% difference is really, and over a long time, compounding over 10, 20 years, it's a meaningful difference you can make to your own finances and hence your life. So I will stop here, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for a wonderful session. It was quite enlightening, and I'm sure a lot of clarity is now available on the current market situation and the basics of investing, with focus on quality and investing with a long-term perspective. We do have some questions, which I will bounce it off to you one by one. Okay, so the first one is from Mr. Ravi. In this environment, would you, from an asset allocation point of view, would you recommend allocation to US equities?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that's one of the big themes which we are also running. So let me just give you a slightly long-winded answer. I think 10 years ago, and I've been an equity manager, and 10 years ago, Indian economy profits growing 18-20%. I think there was really no need for people to diversify globally. We said that there's great opportunity in India. We are growing very, very well. And the current profit growth in the Indian corporate sector is fairly high. And there are a large number of companies and opportunities available. Now, over the last 10 years, some of that has changed. Now, it's not that we don't have companies, but that number of great quality companies is actually shrinking. To give you an example, 10 years ago at Axis Mutual Fund, we had a universe of 350 plus companies. We thought that these are really going to be good performers over the next 3 to 5 years. Today, that number has come down to more like 200 to 25. So in just 10 years, that has happened. And the possible growth rate has moved, or the high growth has moved away from what are traditionally been our strengths, consumer sector, low labor costs, infrastructure development, etc. These were the big stories. I think the story has become more about technology. And the beauty about technology is it doesn't need geography. People can be sitting anywhere in the world and doing business anywhere else. So unfortunately, we do not have that kind of companies represented in the Indian stock market. You can't really buy those businesses. So yes, we have a few very, very good quality businesses available in India, so which we certainly should buy. But equally, we're looking at the global scenario as well as the consumption pattern of us Indians, where we are buying and using services of many of these global multinationals, especially on the technology side, the Apples, the Amazons, the Facebooks, Netflix now, and many, many more. I think there is a need for us to be diversifying globally as well. So I would certainly urge everyone to kind of look at how you can get some meaningful exposure to international markets. And there are some products, some things like even we have, where you can invest in feeders or invest in funds where there is some allocation to Indian equity and some allocation to global equity. And there are many such other products in the market. But yes, the idea should be to get into international investing. Again, not from an index perspective. As you may understand, I am not really a fan of index investing. Even there, if you look at the way the Nasdaq or some of these indices are, while suddenly we look at and say, hey, the Nasdaq is doing very well. But again, you dig a little deeper and you will find out all the wealth there is being created by a few companies. So get into funds where there is active allocation to these high quality growth international businesses as well.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. The next question is from Mr. Pranesh, which refers to one of the slides that you just showed on the dispersion of returns quartile wise. So the question is there a dispersion in the top quartile also in terms of returns?
Yeah, there will be. Obviously, within the top 25 companies, not all would have given the same returns. But the idea is that anyway, it is very difficult to just invest in the top quartile. How to find out the top stocks? What I was just trying to show there was the variance in portfolios. If you were to take variance in individual stocks, it will be humongous. So certainly there is a variance, and you can actually do this exercise and say, let's take 666 stocks and figure out how does the variance within that space work out, and yes, there will be significant variance there as well.
Fine. The next question is from Ms. Usha. Uh, are you suggesting that we should generally always stick to large caps?
No, not at all. But let me just elaborate there. What I always use the word is high quality, sustainable businesses. If you have a business, actually just look at that same slide you were referring to earlier. Top quartile growing at some 27%. Stock is growing 27% for 10 years. Yeah. Now, if you try and think through what is this kind of company where the stock goes up for 10 years at 27%? Now, we'll have lots and lots of companies where the stocks can grow 27% compounded for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but 10 years. So that's what leads to, should lead to some introspection and thinking. Obviously, these are companies which would have grown. Can there be a company which has not grown and still stock has gone up? It's not possible. It's not feasible. Now, then comes the question, what is it that has allowed this company to grow well over the last 10 years? So then it comes to quality, business model, quality of management, etc., etc. So our thinking when we say lower risk, high quality is not to do just with large cap. And that's the beauty about the Indian market. There are great quality businesses available across the spectrum. They could be in large caps, they could be in mid caps, they could be in small caps. Generally speaking, it's the mid and large, which is where these businesses have already exhibited their strength. Small is more about emerging areas. So it may be a little high risk. And also the fact that there is what I would call as market related risk. If there is an event, a small cap will fall more, despite the company being of very high quality, very high ROE, very good long-term growth potential. So I would think somebody should build a portfolio. Initially, if you are generally risk averse, there's no need to go and buy small cap despite high quality businesses, because there will be market events and where these companies stock will be volatile. But if somebody wants to and has a little higher amount of risk appetite, you can get into a high quality growth multi-cap fund where predominantly you will have large cap exposure. There will be some mid and might be some small amount of small cap exposure as well. But the focus is on sustainability and quality, not on size alone.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for that. The next question is from Mr. Ravi Shankar. We are pretty close to the February highs, that is the pre-COVID levels. Do you think a V-shaped recovery has happened, or do you anticipate any unexpected turn? What are your views?
So V-shaped recovery has happened in the markets. Unfortunately, there's no V-shaped recovery in the economy, which is where I think perversely the point I made about economy and markets not being related again has been, or not being very closely linked, has come out. So my sense is that we've had a strong recovery. Some parts of the market is rational, high quality, sustainable businesses, which we think have already turned the corner in terms of recovery in their operating activity, etc. Despite the country being still under partial lockdown, people not coming out, etc. These companies' products and services are being consumed and their sales are going up. So that part is fine. There is some amount of hope, I think, which has come through in what is the more speculative end of the market. So I think there is a lot of activity happening at the retail end. I'm sure many of you are also in that. So sometimes maybe that activity has happened in, maybe the stock might be showing momentum, but in maybe not that great quality business. So if the economy does not support these companies, then there could be some pullback in those businesses. But broadly speaking, I think the worst is over. At any point in time, you can see a pullback in the market. So that's something which we should be open to at all times. But to say that we will go back and see the older levels when there was so much fear and uncertainty, no, I don't think so. I think the economy will now slowly catch up, certainly catch up with some of the high quality stock performances. Some of the weaker ones, penny stocks, etc. I'm not so sure. But so my sense is that the risk in the market is probably, it's always there, a little bit is always there. But high quality businesses, I think there is not that much risk in the market.
Sure. Thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Ajitesh. Is there a correction expected again? And I'll just add one more point to this. There's been a challenge as far as the earnings growth is concerned. Q1, Q2, probably Q3 as well. So would this also add to some kind of expectation as far as a correction again is expected, with your earnings growth not coming through?
So, we can never say correction. See, correction should be expected anytime. I mean, people would have thought that from 7,500, it went to 9,000, corrected to 8,000, went all the way to 10,000, corrected to 9,100. So, any market, if you see, even if you are in the strongest of bull markets, there will be some correction. And that's something which certainly I do not know when it is going to happen. So, you might be should always be prepared. We've seen a strong up move. There could be a small correction. But that's more for traders and people who are trying to time the market. From investors' perspective, even if the market is 10% lower or 10% higher from here, there will be opportunities and from a long-term perspective. Coming to linking it to economic growth, I think the market is very clear, and that's, I think, the beauty of the market. The market generally looks forward. I think people have just discounted that this year is going to be for many businesses like a complete whitewash. It's all gone. So let's look at what happens in 21, 22, and 22, 23. And I'm quite hopeful, not just hopeful, I really expect that we will have some kind of a vaccine or a cure available, and the economy can go back. It will be, for some businesses, it will be very difficult, but broadly, the economy will go back in 21, 22 to some kind of pre-COVID levels, and then growth from there on. So you have to start building those kinds of scenarios in valuation of stocks. And that's what essentially the market is doing right now. The market has completely brushed aside this year's poor performance, which we all know, and started focusing on the longer term. There's no point saying that this year profits will be down 50% for company X, so its stock should be 50% lower. That doesn't work. Long-term potential, if it still exists and it's still going to grow at 15%, then maybe 1 year's profits, maybe it should be down 10%. That's it, and then start growing from there.
Sure, great. Thank you so much. The next question is from Mr. Amit Bapat, who's been an investor, mutual fund investor per se for the last 10 years or so. The question is, are there any timelines after which one should look at exiting a scheme and looking at investing in new schemes?
Great question. I think what I would say is there's always a timeline for a review. I don't see any reason if you're and one of the reasons why when I showed that slide that there's a 5-6% difference is because of that even the most long-term investors, because there has been a short-term underperformance in some fund, they will just exit that and get into something which has done very well, and then that doesn't do well. So I think review must always be done. That the reason why you got into that fund is that does that continue? Does that strategy which the fund has said they will do they continue with that? And whether that strategy still holds water in the sense that will, over the next 3-5 years, will continue to do well. The best of stocks, there will be times when they will not do well. Very clear example was the year 2016. We had demonetization, and globally there was a time when only high beta stocks did well. But if you had done that, if you had sold off your high quality stocks, or in demonetization time when all these high quality consumer oriented businesses took a hammering last quarter of 2016, I mean, would have been the worst mistake. 2017, it all reversed and reversed a lot more. So the focus should be that is the stocks, underlying stocks in the portfolio are the ones you want to hold for the long run. Just stay with that, I think. And if there's a change, by all means, sell and get into something which is different, but do not chase returns. And that analysis should be done probably every 6 to 12 months. So in case there is a change required, please do it. But I think good quality funds normally won't change their strategy, won't change their style. And in a sense, they will allow you to stay in the fund for a long, long period of time. There should be no reason to actually get out of those funds at all.
Right. Thank you so much for that. We'll just take the next couple of questions before we close this session. Okay, next is from Mr. Prasad Vyas. What are the barometers to judge performance of various mutual fund schemes? What should we exactly look at when we, when we look at comparing schemes and choosing which one to go for?
So one is so 3 or 4 things. I think one of the very, very important points is a little bit of an understanding of what the fund house is trying to do. Is the strategy which they are going to deploy or are deploying, is it a tactical strategy or something which is sustainable for the long run? Can, with the same strategy, they run the portfolio for the next 10 years? Yeah. Every portfolio manager on the side will do some small amount of what I should say active management on that, but overall the strategy should be something which is sustainable, which does not force you to kind of liquidate positions or sell out. So that is one. So very clear thought process on how you are going to invest. You certainly don't want to be with a fund house which says, okay, today I like this, tomorrow I like something else. In fact, as an aside on a humorous vein, we have a saying in the markets that strong bulls, people who have a very bullish tendency, they all make money in the market. And there are people in the markets who are generally always bearish, so they're looking out for short positions. They also make money in the markets. The bulls make money, bears make money, but then the pigs get slaughtered. Now, these are the people who are at times bullish, then sentiment changes, become bearish, and they are the ones. No, so you don't want to get into that kind of scenario, especially with institutional managers. So that is the first thing. What is the process? What is the philosophy? Second is look at performance from a 3-year kind of a perspective. I think that's the ideal. Obviously, don't want to see 10 years, 5 years. That's too long. 1 year is too short in my view. 3-year kind of performance and what are the kind of maximum drawdowns. So we talk about risk-adjusted performance. Sometimes it's a little too difficult to understand. But yes, what has been the biggest? How has the fund done in the bad times? I think that's very, very crucial. As I showed you one slide, funds which are able to control the downside actually do really, really well long run. And if you see long-term charts and you start to plot markets versus the funds, whenever the markets are down, these funds, obviously they are also down, but they are down little, and then the gap starts to emerge over a period of time in terms of performance. So risk-adjusted returns for people who cannot decipher risk metrics like beta and volatility and standard deviation, just look at what is the maximum drawdown over the last 3-5 year period as compared to what the markets did. I think it's a fairly good proxy on risk management. And lastly, it is a little bit more in depth, which is the kind of businesses you are holding. There has to be reasonable value. Now, I'm not using the word value in terms of lower price stocks. Value in the sense that the kind of multiples or valuation you are giving, is the growth likely to be? So instead of PE multiples, we talk about price earnings to growth multiples. Again, a little bit more technical, but essentially what you are trying to ensure is that you are in terms aligned with really good quality growth businesses at all points in time. Yeah, those are the 3 things I would really look at. But the most important one is the first one. I think if that is really there, I think 2 and 3 will normally fall in place.
Great. Thank you so much for this. We'll take the last 2 questions before we close this session. What would be your views on Indian startups which are looking at listing? What kind of portfolio allocation should an investor look at, from Mr. Prashant?
Great question. I think many of the great businesses which we now buy in the listed markets, obviously they started up some time back. So India is has a lot of entrepreneurial talent. We are seeing many of these companies becoming fairly large. Problem is how to get exposure to them. If there's a way for you to get exposure, more importantly, understand. I think the critical issue is many of these startups, apart from the challenge of having having a strong management team, stroke money, having important to survive and grow. So those are obviously risks. The important part also is how will they be able to scale up in terms of capability and in terms of competing with the stronger companies who might be trying to disrupt or be in competition with. So it's a relatively risky area, I think, left to professional managers who kind of admit that, or maybe only 1 out of 10 such investments really yields returns. It's not an easy area. I would ideally like to allocate money. I think it should be there, but it's not an easy asset class to be there. I think there are some alternative investment funds, etc., where you can get such exposure. Obviously, there's not much in the listed space, but from an asset allocation perspective, completely agree. For people who have the risk appetite, some small allocation can be there. But the difficulty is how to get that allocation. And as I said, it has to be done through really professional people who really understand the private equity firms, the venture capital firms. I don't think normal lay investors should do it. Yeah, unless there are professionals and people who understand that space very well. Yes, absolutely. Then you can go ahead and do it on your own.
Great. We'll take the last question before we close this session, which comes from Mr. Ajay Singh. Interesting question. What would be your views on life insurance companies despite very high embedded values, and your views on AMCs as an asset allocation, as an investment avenue?
So I think it comes back to that whole Indian story, which actually we didn't talk about today. Why is it that we say equity markets will do well? Why, and within equity markets, the great businesses will do well? I think there has to be something underlying opportunity, and the underlying opportunity, like any other developing market, what we call as emerging market, is there. I mean, which is low penetration, young population, demographic dividend, all that, I think. And the level of the penetration levels. So in a sense, if GDP grows at 5%, you get a multiplier. So instead of 5% GDP growth, a particular sector can grow twice that or thrice that. And the two businesses which you talked about are essentially in that space. In fact, the entire financial services business is not a multiplier. And these two spaces, which is more to do with investments and protection, I think the penetration levels are very, very low, and it should certainly grow much faster than nominal GDP. And it's not something that it will grow for a short period. And what you mentioned about very high embedded value, etc., I think the people are essentially betting that these businesses will grow for the next 15, 20, 25 years. So when you get a high growth business, and these, after a time, even insurance becomes a cash generator. Mutual fund asset management companies anyway do not have much capital investments, and what profits are equal to cash flow essentially. The quality of earnings becomes very, very good, and if you can find a business which is going to grow 15-20% for 20 years, then obviously it will go at reasonably high valuations, and I think there's a lot of money to be made. I'm not saying recommending a buy on any of the listed insurance companies or asset management companies. Valuations, etc., will play a role. But I think these are very, very interesting opportunities, and some of the real great opportunities in the Indian market.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I'm afraid we'll have to come to the end of the session now. Thank you so much, investors, for taking the time out and joining us. I'm sure we found a lot of value add in the way Mr. Chandresh has explained his perspectives and his thoughts on the market situation and the way forward and the basics of investing, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chandresh, for a wonderful session.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thanks for patient listening, and I hope I've been able to add some value, some understanding, which will help you in your investing journey. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir. And thank you, investors.